He was known simply as the Major to the staff at the Whitetail Creek Gun Range, a private club nestled in the rolling hills of the Virginia countryside. To them, he was just another retiree, a quiet, unassuming man in his late 50s who showed up every Tuesday and Thursday morning like clockwork. He drove a dusty 10-year-old pickup truck, wore a faded baseball cap pulled low over his brow, and always carried the same beat-up canvas rifle case. He paid his fees, nodded politely to the range safety officer, and took his place at Lane 7, the furthest one from the clubhouse. His name was Arthur, and he was a ghost haunting his own life. The other regulars at the range were a boisterous bunch. There was Bulldog Brannigan, a retired cop who fancied himself a tactical expert and spent most of his time complaining about the new generation of polymer pistols. There were the Callahan brothers, Kevin and Sean, who ran a successful construction business and treated their Saturday morning range trips as a combination of therapy and frat party. And then there was the younger crowd, the weekend warriors in their high-end gear, eager to show off the latest optics and gadgets. They all noticed Arthur. He was a fixture, but they also all dismissed him. To them, he was a relic. They'd watch him meticulously set up his targets at a modest 25 yards, never the 100-yard line where the serious shooters played. They'd see him pull out his rifle, an old wooden-stocked Remington 700, a model so common it was practically the family sedan of the bolt-action world. It had no adjustable cheek rest, no carbon fiber barrel, no high-magnification scope, just a simple, workmanlike piece of steel and wood. "He's probably a hunter," Kevin Callahan once remarked to his brother, gesturing with his chin toward Lane 7. "Deer season's months away, but the old-timers like to stay limber." "Yeah," Sean chuckled, adjusting the bipod on his brand-new, camouflage-patterned precision rifle. "Probably shoots a 3-inch group and calls it a day. My grandmother could outshoot him with that antique." The teasing was subtle at first, then became more pronounced. Bulldog Brannigan, never one for tact, would walk past Arthur's lane and offer unsolicited advice. "You know, Major," he'd say, his voice loud enough for others to hear, "they make these new scope mounts with levels built in. I'll help you keep things straight. That old scope of yours must have about 100 miles of Kentucky windage dialed into it." Arthur would simply look up, offer a faint, non-committal smile, and say, "I'll look into that, Bulldog. Thanks." Then he'd turn back to his target, his movements slow and deliberate. The range sessions followed a pattern. Arthur would load a single round into the chamber, take a breath that seemed to last forever, and fire. He'd then work the bolt, eject the casing, and repeat. He never fired in rapid succession. He never used a magazine. It was a ritualistic, almost meditative process. One afternoon, the teasing took a more competitive turn. A group of younger men, all former military from what they said, were at the range. They had heard about Bulldog's nickname for Arthur and found it amusing. They were setting up for a long-range session, unspooling Kestrel weather meters and consulting ballistic apps on their tablets. "Hey, Major!" one of them, a muscular guy named Travis, called out. "We're going to be ringing steel at 600. You want to come play with the big dogs for once? Might be fun for you to stretch that hunting rifle's legs." There was a ripple of laughter from the group. Bulldog, who was watching from the bench, grinned. Arthur finished his shot, the crack of the rifle echoing down the range. He slowly rose from his position, placing the old Remington carefully on the bench. He looked at Travis, his gaze calm and unnervingly direct. 600 yards? Arthur asked, his voice quiet, almost lost in the open air. "That's a fair piece." "Piece of cake with the right gear," Travis boasted, patting his own rifle. "Come on, we'll spot for you. It'll be a laugh." Arthur looked at the steel target, a simple silhouette, shimmering in the heat haze at the far end of the range. He then looked at the younger man's rifle, a masterpiece of modern engineering. He gave a slight nod. "All right, I'll take one shot." A murmur of amused interest rippled through the observers. Kevin and Sean Callahan stopped their own shooting to watch. Bulldog leaned against a post, a cynical smirk on his face. Travis and his friends exchanged glances, barely suppressing their grins. This was going to be good. Arthur didn't reach for a ballistic computer. He didn't consult a chart. He simply picked up his old rifle, slid a single round into the chamber, and settled into a prone position. It wasn't the careful, comfortable position of a weekend shooter. It was something else entirely. His body seemed to melt into the ground, becoming one with the earth. The rifle, an extension of his form, was utterly still. The way he adjusted the sling, the way his non-firing hand cupped under the stock, it was fluid, practiced, and looked ancient, like a technique from a forgotten era of marksmanship. He stared downrange for a long, silent moment. He wasn't looking at the target, Travis thought. He was looking past it, through it. Arthur was reading the wind, but not from the flags fluttering near the firing line. He was watching the mirage, the subtle shimmer of heat waves rising from the sun-baked earth between him and the steel. He was feeling the breeze on his skin, translating its touch into a calculation of wind speed and angle with an instinct honed over decades. The chatter died down, and the only sound was the gentle rustle of wind and the distant chirp of crickets. Arthur's breathing slowed, became almost imperceptible. The world seemed to narrow to a single point of focus. Then he fired. The report was sharp, but unremarkable. What was remarkable was what happened next. The 600-yard steel target didn't just ring. It screamed. The clang was immediate and violent, the plate swinging wildly on its chains as if struck by a sledgehammer. A stunned silence fell over the range. Travis lowered his binoculars, his mouth slightly agape. He looked at his friends, then back at Arthur, who was already standing up, brushing the dust from his elbows. He worked the bolt, ejecting the spent casing, which he caught and slipped into his pocket. The old rifle was returned to its canvas case. Center mass, Travis breathed out, his voice stripped of all its earlier swagger. Dead center, at 600, with a hunting rifle and iron sights. Bulldog's smirk had vanished. Kevin and Sean Callahan stared, their own expensive rifles momentarily forgotten. Arthur zipped up his case and slung it over his shoulder. As he walked past the group of stunned young men, he paused next to Travis. "That's a nice rifle you have there," Arthur said softly, "but the rifle doesn't do the work. It never has." He looked at Travis, his old, tired eyes holding a glimmer of something else. A memory. A ghost. The secret is all in the breathing and the waiting. He tipped his cap to Bulldog, who could only nod dumbly in return, and walked toward his dusty pickup truck. The story of the old-timer's impossible shot spread through the club like wildfire. Speculation ran rampant. Some thought he was a former Marine scout sniper. Others suggested he might have been a competitive shooter back in his day. But the mystery only deepened a few weeks later, when Bulldog Brannigan, his curiosity finally getting the better of his pride, did some digging. He had a friend who still worked records for the city police department. He asked him to run the old guy's plates, just to see if he had any kind of record, anything that might explain the shot. His friend called him back, his voice odd. "Buddy, that plate you ran? It's registered to a retired military guy, clean as a whistle." "So?" Bulldog prompted. "So," his friend continued slowly, "my system flagged it because it's connected to an old MOD file at the British Ministry of Defense." I dug a little deeper, just out of curiosity. "Bulldog, the name attached to that truck is Arthur Pendleton. Does that name mean anything to you?" It didn't. Not then. Bulldog hung up and did his own search on a public computer. He started with the name and the term British Army. It took him a while, navigating through declassified documents and old regimental histories, but he finally found it, buried in an archived copy of a regimental journal from the late 1980s, a citation, a mention of a specific action during the Dhofar Rebellion in Oman, a conflict shrouded in secrecy. It mentioned a small, covert unit, a forerunner to the modern Special Air Service, and listed among the names of the troopers was one Lance Corporal Arthur Pendleton. Further searching revealed more. A shadow. Mentions in other declassified after-action reports from conflicts that were never officially wars. Northern Ireland during the height of the Troubles, the Falklands, where his unit operated behind Argentine lines for weeks. There was a photograph, grainy and black and white, of a much younger Arthur, his face smeared with camouflage paint, holding the unmistakable shape of an L-42A1 bolt-action rifle, the British military's standard sniper platform for decades. The rifle in the photo was the spitting image of the one he brought to the range. It was his service rifle, the one he had carried into combat. Bulldog sat back, his mouth dry. Arthur wasn't a hunter. He wasn't a retired hobbyist. He was a ghost, a legend, from a world Bulldog and his cronies only pretended to know. He was a royal sentinel, a term from an era. A marksman from the SAS, whose kills and missions would never see the light of day, whose very existence was a matter of state secrecy. The next Thursday, Arthur was back at Lane 7. Bulldog approached him not with a smirk, but with a hesitant respect. He didn't mention what he had found. He just sat down next to him, watching him load the old rifle with the same deliberate ancient rhythm. "That was one hell of a shot the other week, Major," Bulldog said quietly. Arthur looked at him, a faint knowing smile playing on his lips. He had seen the look in Bulldog's eyes. He knew. "It was a good rifle," Arthur said, his gaze drifting toward the distant hills. "Had it a long time. It's seen a lot of places. Done a lot of things." He paused, his thumb gently stroking the worn wooden stock. Things a man doesn't talk about at a gun range." He loaded a single round, took his long, eternal breath, and fired. The crack echoed across the peaceful range. For a moment, the quiet of the Virginia countryside was filled with the ghost of distant thunder. A whisper of a life lived on a razor's edge, a life that no one at Whitetail Creek could ever truly understand. They only saw the quiet man in the faded cap. They were completely ignorant of the Royal Sentinel, who, for a few decades, had been one of the most dangerous men on the planet.